Hustle, your sci-fi fantasy virtual writers group. Today we're talking about magic. I'm Anton.
I'm Chris.
I'm Lucy.
I'm Carter.
And I'm AP.
And we're not just talking about magic, we're talking about magic and technology, since this is a fantasy and sci-fi virtual writing group.
Chris made us include technology.
That's right, because as Arthur C. Clarke said in his third law, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Oh, very clever there.
As we all know.
As we do all know. So specifically what we're talking about with this episode is what makes a good magic system, and then the presentation and the choosing of magic or technology. So Carter, you have magic in your book. Why don't you tell us a little bit about...
I have magic.
You do. You have magic. You are magic.
Yeah, so I have like a work in progress kind of YA fantasy called Fountains of Sound. It's about a rich girl whose dad owns a mine, and she becomes like an eco-terrorist, basically. So this is a scene where I kind of introduce part of the magic system. The magic in this book is based on sound. And so she is basically in a kind of training sequence with this guy in her pirate crew who is like able to use this magic, which almost nobody in the world can do. So here's a little snippet. Cal lifted his hands and gave a dramatic clap, loud enough to echo through the marsh before fading into the buzz of bugs and swaying leaves. All noise lives in the air, he said. Shouts and whispers, gunshots, bird songs, all of it moves in the same way, quivering in the spaces between us. If you are attuned, you can learn to control it. He clapped again with the exact same motion, only this time Aiko heard no smack and no echoes. Instead, his clap was met with a flash of silence. The ambience of the marsh vanished, as though Cal had slapped the sound right out of existence. For a moment, all Aiko could hear was her own heartbeat.
Oof.
That's
good.
Wow.
That's good.
This is a very interesting and unique magic system. And I think I speak for all of us when I say that I love the use of sound. It's not something I remember seeing before much of, and I'm immediately intrigued. I instantly want to know how they're going to use sound within the climax of this book. How does this play out? How is this going to aid them going forwards? And I also like how the magic system relies on belief and focus in order to make it work.
Right.
Which I think is something that is relatable to the real world.
Yeah, you got to use the force a little bit.
You have to use the force. Yeah, exactly.
But that being said, one of the things I really like about this, aside from the writing, which is really great, is that you actually give us a magic system where there are clear rules that you have to follow. He explains how it works in a way that allows us to believe in something totally unbelievable like magic. Like there's logic behind it. There's a set of rules that you have to follow to make it work. And I think a lot of magic systems that work really well have that aspect to it. They have a consistency behind them. And I like the way you lay that out with him explaining it to her.
No, I think you guys covered. I mean, I think it works well. I do want to add one thing. I think it's unique that it is sound, because I think with a lot of other fantasy magic systems, I think they'll do a lot of other things. They'll do materials, right? You have to have the certain kinds of things. You have to be born with it, so it's sort of genetic. So you're going to talk a little bit about that. But I think this idea that it's sound is very unique, and I think that's, anytime you could do something a little different.
Yeah, I wanted to avoid doing like a general elemental thing, like even in like Game of Thrones, which has really cool use of magic. I think it's still there's fire magic, and then there's dragons, and there's ice magic. It's all very kind of medieval, elemental. I was kind of going for something a little more rooted in stuff that's directly interesting to me, like audio.
So if you wanted, now that you have a very solid base for this scene, you have the mechanics working, you have the conflict working, if you wanted to think about elevating it to the next level, you might want to start thinking about putting elements in like the context, the history of the magic. You might want to give us Cal's opinion towards the magic. Is it something he doesn't normally talk about, but he's going to reveal these secrets to this character? how long has it been around? Does it have a color? Does it have a feel? Who uses it? What do they use it for? And once you start to shade in these answers, the mechanics of the magic will fade a little. You never want the focus of the scene to be too much on the mechanics.
Right.
You want them to be there, but you want them to sort of be hidden just beneath the surface of the stuff that is more interesting to the reader, which is why this magic exists, where it comes from, and what it means within the world.
Right. I think that's really, really good advice. I'm always a little hesitant to try to do too much world building in any one scene, you know? But I think that I could definitely bring out a little bit more of the background and what it really means to these characters that they're doing this, not just the fact that she's learning it, you know?
Has it exactly, and you can do it very economically as well. You don't need to do all of this. You could do one thing
Totally.
with it.
And if you weave it in with the world building, obviously a magic system is part of the world building, but if the magic system exists, like you said, because of the history of it and it's tied into cultural things, then that makes all of it way more immersive.
Right. In this story, it kind of relates to the fact that she's like a noblewoman, and this is magic that's very secret and very practiced by disadvantaged people out of the eyes of, you know, the upper crust. I'm not really sure if it's like illegal or not. I'm still figuring out some details, but
So it's interesting. This goes exactly to what you're talking about. So the Orson Scott Card wrote this book about how to write science fiction and fantasy, which is strangely, applicable
helpful.
here. Yeah, and he's got a thing on magic in there, and I think it's right on point with what you're saying, Carter, which is that magic has to have a price. So just as we were saying, if it's upper crust or it's illegal or it has to be sought out or something, this goes back to what we've been talking about, clear rules. I think that's really important. If it's, I think, if you think about something like Game of Thrones where they have blood magic or this kind of magic,
Right.
and there's a huge price to be paid, whether, by the characters in order to bring this thing about, it creates that tension and that drama so that, like you were saying, AP, it's part of the world, but it's also part of the drama, which I think is really important.
Oh, would you call that double duty?
I would call that double duty, yes, another important factor.
Returning to the idea of the rules, so I wanted to talk about Isaac Asimov and his Foundation series.
Why?
So, I know. Curse you, fantasy writers. But so he has a concept in that book called psychohistory, which is basically, it's like a combination of statistics and math and sociology, and it enables these scientists, and I'm using air quotes for that because it's pretty far out there.
They're not real scientists.
Well, it enables them to make predictions about long-term future events for big groups of people, not for a particular person. But the way he goes about it is he explains it and goes into details about it in the same way that a science fiction writer would talk about how a faster than light spaceship drive works or something like that. And I think this is an example, even though it's not magic, it basically is magic,
Right.
as we talked about. An example of a system that you believe in because there's enough consistency, enough rules created that it seems real.
Are there like limitations to it as well?
Absolutely. So the further out in time you get, the less accurate it gets, and they make adjustments for things that happen, and et cetera, et cetera. But
That's
yeah,
cool.
absolutely.
Yeah,
It's
I
a
like
cool
that.
concept. Whether you want to slog through the 8,000 pages of the Foundation series, I don't know. But
No, but that ties into something I've heard, I believe Brandon Sanderson talk about before. I've listened to a lot of his lectures, and he talks a lot about magic systems, and I think he has super interesting magic systems. I mean, Mistborn and the Stormlight Archive both have his world building based around those magic systems is crazy. But a big thing that he said, and I'm paraphrasing, is that magic should be an obstacle. It shouldn't be there to just solve problems for your characters. It should be there to create problems.
Right.
Like you said, he creating rules. Brandon Sanderson in Mistborn, he's got all kinds of different types of magic, but one of them, allomancy, is genetic, and it has to do with classes. So the upper class has it, and it creates problems for all these people that aren't upper class.
I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit with
Damn
you
it, Lucy.
guys and
Shocker.
Every time.
talk about magic and mystery and how it's not always a great idea to explain all the mechanics of how magic works, because many of life's mysteries are not fully understood. We don't come into the world with a handbook. For example, love and friendship, we find out they have these invisible rules and we find out how they work as we go along. And magic is sometimes really fun when it's written that way as well. For example, Neil Gaiman does this all the time. You are thrown into a world with a character in which the magic just exists the way it is. That is how it works. It's ancient. It's a force that's bigger than you most of the time. And you have to find out the rules of this magic as you explore the story with the character. Take the ocean, for example. In the ocean at the end of the lane, we know that the hemstocks use it to travel. We know that it has healing powers because that's where Letty Hemstock goes after sacrificing herself for the narrator. But the mystery of how it operates is never fully explained.
Right.
So it's left as this big, mysterious, ancient force that we understand how it works, but we'll never fully understand the power of it and how it's operating. And that keeps the mystery going, I think, in a really nice way.
Well, I was just going to say that brings to mind something that, like, maybe it's about, because you make a really good case for that, and I love Neil Gaiman's writing.
Yeah, that
and
book rules, too.
It's a great book. Maybe it has to do with the type of world you're trying to create. So
I think it does.
Neil Gaiman deals in almost, like you said, mythological type, primal, more like ancient kind of feeling, or like fairy tales and that's
Yeah,
like
it's
fable.
more childlike. Like there's this sense of wonder, and like you're not sure really how crazy or how deep the magic goes because you're
Exactly.
And he's talking about childhood and memory, and those things take the forefront of the story. I think the magic is
So
supporting.
the magic doesn't have to do as much heavy lifting.
Exactly, but when you're talking science, you can't get away with.
Exactly. And another example to contrast that is The Magicians by Lev Grossman, where he's telling a totally different type of story. He wants it to be grounded in reality, and that's part of the fabric of that book is like, this is happening in a real world, you know? And so maybe the laws work when you're trying to write something like that, and when you're trying to do a Neil Gaiman magical, amazing book, it's something different.
But with something like The Magicians, that's also part of the portal that you as the reader go through with the character, which is the character starts off in the regular world and then gets invited to the school, and you go on with them with this journey where you now discover that magic is a real thing and you are introduced to the rules at the same time as the character, which I think that book does really well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that the Neil Gaiman thing is really interesting because it also does play into the whole idea that AP brought up about magic as an obstacle. Because not only is the ocean like very mysterious and it gives the hempstocks a lot of powers and abilities that, you know, they can do all kinds of stuff, but it also like lets monsters into the world. And,
Right.
like,
It's true.
There's always a
all kinds-
cost, yeah.
Like a lot of like people die and like there's this whole like traumatic like his parents become evil and like all kinds of shit happens because of that ocean, which is a pond. Sorry, I'm just kind of spoiling the book a little bit. But it's
Damn it.
it's a really good book.
We'll have to put a spoiler alert in front.
But he definitely uses it both ways, and I think that you can use magic in a way that challenges your characters, both by having it be this very complex, you know, enumerated system that they have to kind of attack and figure out, and also by having it be this mysterious, more Lovecraftian thing that no one really fully understands.
Yeah, it's unpredictable in a way.
Yeah.
There is no system because you can't predict the laws of it because it's magic. It's
Right.
the opposite of science.
So I'm not a sci-fi expert. I don't read a lot of it. I definitely don't write it. So this question's for you, Chris. I'm not sure if you're familiar with. A while ago, I read something, you know, hand wavium versus hard science when it comes to sci-fi writing. And hand wavium is stuff like Star Trek, where it's like the warp drive or the photon lasers versus, I don't know, you have better examples,
Well,
I'm sure.
I mean, I could go ad nauseum into discussing hard sci-fi versus.
would you please?
Absolutely. Do we have 20 more minutes?
Why would you do that to us?
This goes back to exactly what we were talking about a few minutes ago about it's about the context, about the world that it's in. So, like, you know, if you read somebody like Alistair Reynolds or something, which probably none of you guys have read, he, you know, used to be a physicist or whatever, and he writes these books that, you know, if they have faster than light drives, there's very good explanations for why. But most of his books don't. You know, he deals with far out crazy science that actually has a basis in reality. But most science fiction doesn't fall into that category. That's why I think science fiction and fantasy are so, it's the same freaking thing.
Well, I think we're circling the point here of what makes a good magic system, whether it has the clearly defined rules or not. It serves the story really well in the world that they're trying to build.
Absolutely.
Right.
And that's, you know, that's what makes a good magic system.
Right. It has to be believable, but it absolutely has to be in service of the story, 100%. Yeah.
Believable has different meanings depending on the context of the book you're writing to.
Yeah, the subgenre.
Of course, yeah. But I mean, this is, with sci-fi, if the technology doesn't read, it doesn't matter how good the story
Right.
is. It's, you know, they have to work hand in hand. So, all right. This has been the Genre Hustle. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
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 Bye.